Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Let me extend a warm welcome to all of you on behalf of myself. I'm Nicholas DiMancio, Director of the Berkeley Center for New Media, and also on behalf of Associate Vice Chancellor for the Arts and Design, Shannon Jackson, who is the author of this larger series, A&D Mondays, in which we are very pleased to present our own art, technology, and culture lecture series, of which tonight's lecture form a part. I'm going to leave the introduction of our amazing speaker tonight to my colleague Gail DeKosnik, but I'll just briefly mention that next week in the A&D Monday Night Series, we have our amazing Berkeley colleague, Dr. Keltner, who is a consultant to the Pixar film Up in psychology, talking about the art of emotions and emotions in art, from cinema to the empathetic museum. On November 6th, we have the next lecture in our ATC lecture series. We have Michael Rock from the graphic design firm 2x4 in New York, who works with clients from Kanye West to Rem Koolhaas. The title of his lecture is We Must Conjure Our Gods Before We Obey Them. And finally, on November 13th, we have Bill Brown lecturing on the larger theme of this semester, which is reassemblage in theory, practice, and art. So I hope to see all of you back here for those amazing lectures, and I will introduce my colleague at the Center for New Media and Associate Professor in Theater and Performance Studies and the Berkeley Center for New Media, Abigail DeKosnik. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming to this event tonight. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce our speaker, Paolo Cirio, tonight, whose work I so greatly admire. Paolo Cirio is a conceptual artist from Italy, whose current base of operations is New York City. He has been described by art critic Chin Chin Yap as, quote, part of a burgeoning field of artists whose work is variously known as hacker art, digital legal art, digital actionism, and perhaps most memorably, cease and desist art, a term coined by the critic and curator Simona Lodi. Lodi wrote in 2010 that, quote, earning oneself a cease and desist letter has become the new frontier in art, a symbol of the cause for the freedom to create in the corporation era. Paolo also describes himself as a pirate as well as a hacker and an artist, and I will be profiling his work along with the work of other artists, politicians, activists, and writers who self-identify as pirates in my forthcoming book, Performing Piracy. Paolo has won numerous awards, including the Golden Nika First Prize at Ars Electronica in Linz, the Transmediale Second Prize in Berlin, the I-Beam Fellowship, and an NEA grant. He has exhibited all over the world, including at the Tate Modern and Somerset House in London, the Museum for Photography in Berlin, MoCA Sydney, CenArt in Mexico, ZKM in Karlsruhe, Gaieté Lyrique in Paris, the Haifa Museum of Art, and the China Academy of Art in Hangzhou. I find his work to be deeply playful, hilariously performative, smartly critical, dangerous, provocative, thoughtful, witty, and replete with deconstructionist as well as productive and future-oriented energies. Please join me in welcoming Paolo Cirio.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for having invited me here. It's a pleasure. Berkeley somehow was always in my mind. I started as an anti-war activist, so you can imagine what it means to be here for me. So thanks again so much. And I will talk about a lot of things. I've been around for a few years, although I am young. I did a lot of projects. But I will focus on a few that are pretty much about intervention on the internet. And so, by the way, I call myself conceptual art, but as Abigail said, it's not really covering everything I do. I also kind of do street art. Some of my work can be considered documentary art. And I also think a lot, so I write, and I do a variety of things. In this case, I want to focus on internet art and intervention again, something that I call socially engaged internet art because it's kind of like pretty political. And it's particularly on this idea of the aesthetics of information ethics that somehow covers quite a few issues that I address with my work. And to start with that, we should look at the general definition of information ethics that's kind of like the branch of ethics that focuses on the relationship between creation, organization, dissemination, and use of information. And so that's what I do. I just work with information and pretty much about the distribution of information. So I just move it, I manipulate it, and, but this has to do with ethics, and you will see why. And so I look at information and what it generates. So information society of today that you might consider it as about internet, let's say, it's not only that, has great potentials, right? But has also great limits, and there are several conflicts, and especially there are a lot of contradictions. And you will probably see a lot of contradictions tonight, and that actually I am trying to address these contradictions. And then, of course, now internet information is about everything. So think about how knowledge is, the distribution, the access of knowledge is affecting what we know. Think about the economy, so how information is monetized, is owned, and how this is driving the economy today. Think about the personal sphere, so the public, the private, so that's about privacy and politics, especially today, so how democracy is affected by the control over information. And also in general, the perception of reality, right, that also changed, so it has to do with the field of semiology. So I want to start to present this project that's very conceptual. Nothing happens here, but it gives you probably some idea about the programs that I have behind my work. So here the concept is think about society and the organization of society as an algorithm. So now when we do make software, we think to have the software working better, we fix the bugs, we improve them and faster, but we don't do that in society. Society is very slow. So here I am proposing basically to reorganize society based on main principles and flows of principles to make it work better. You will see quite a lot of these diagrams, and these are diagrams that I call social algorithms, that they help me to visualize this kind of like work that's about managing information and organizing information. So all this agency, this process, relations, mechanics of information can be visualized through the diagrams. It's very hard to make a picture of this kind of work. One picture, sometimes it's not enough. So that's why the diagrams. And these diagrams are systems of software and structures. And so when it's structure, it's about the concept. But within this structure, there is a flow of information, right? And so these diagrams also like show you scripts and scores of performances. So tonight you will see quite a few of performances and quite a few of these concepts and structure of information. Okay, so a little bit of more theory. Material, so I also need to define what's the material I use for my work. So I consider, yes, I do work with internet algorithm and big data. However, these are affecting economics and politics and culture. So I talk about a network of systems that are all interconnected. And so my material really is all these systems together. It's all these networks. So some works are about internet, but actually are about economy or eventually about politics. So this is actually my material I work with. Technique. So as an artist, I actually use techniques that are already there. They're very common in contemporary art, at least. That's about recontextualizing, appropriating, exposing. That's pretty common in my work. In contemporary art, too. The difference here that the information is very sensitive, and so that act has a consequence that's way wider and that's way more powerful, and you will see how. And here I want to present the first project that's called Street Ghost. This is a very simple idea, but somehow summarize a lot of that I said so far. In this case, I go on Google Street View. I look for any random people on Google Street View, and I take a screenshot of the person that I like. Let's say they like this picture, I take the screenshot. Then I print that screenshot, that figure, and I go back to the exact spot where the Google card took that picture, and I paste it in a street art fashion. So basically, on one side you see the screenshot, and on the other side you see the paper posted that was glued on the wall. So let me play a first video.
For Mashable, I'm Lauren Goris. Google's Street View feature, which aims to capture city streets and landmarks, sometimes captures you. You've probably seen it online, the blurred faces on the sidewalk or outside the grocery store. But now you can see some of the same figures offline. Street artist Paolo Cirio is copying and literally pasting life-sized images of people captured by Google on streets in the exact spots you'd find them online. He calls the project Street Ghosts, a fitting name because you'd never be able to match the blurry face. Cirio is putting posters up in London, Berlin, and New York City, but he's not doing it as a kind of Where's Waldo. Instead, he's trying to make a statement about the publication of the images. He writes, "As the publicly accessible pictures of individuals taken without their permission, I took the pictures of individuals without Google's permission and posted them on public walls." Now, whether his poster prints make the political statement he's hoping for is really up to you, but Street View has grabbed plenty of headlines over privacy issues. You may remember that man in France who sued Google over an image captured of him peeing in his front yard. Thankfully, Cirio has not taken his project to France yet. For Mashable, I'm...
All right. In fact, I did go to France, and this project was done in pretty much all over the world. I am just back from Japan, and in many cities, and there have been probably 200 or more of these people that have been captured from me, actually, and they became kind of street art. And so, of course, there is any kind of situations, like in this case, it's just a lady going on a bike. I take a screenshot and I paste it exactly in the same spot. And sometimes there is an entire family, you know, it's like everyone is walking on the street. What I say that this is kind of a casualty, it's a casualty of a war, an information war, because these are victims of a war between the algorithms, between the legislators, between Google that want to capture anything, and eventually an artist like me that want to use this material. And the point here that eventually the algorithm fails. So in this case, you see that Google is trying to blur all the faces, but one, the mother, is actually pretty visible, you know, so that she is unfortunately a casualty of this system. And then the fact that these pictures are coming from the past in a way. So sometimes they're pretty old, they're like 5 years old or so on. So this also points at the fact that we are all ghosts already. We all come back. We will come back in the future, maybe not on Google's review, maybe on Facebook. In 200 years, Facebook might want to use your data for an ad. You will be gone, but you will be the ghost in a way. And here there is also another question about the ownership of this picture. So you see that here I maintain the copyright, the watermark, the copyright. So who owns this picture? Is the Google? Is this person? And how Google can, or is like the city too? Because there is something to say about the fact that Google is just like trying to collect everything out there, and then it's trying to say, okay, I own this, but actually that information was public already. It was actually made by the city, made by the people, and they never paid anyone, but they actually sell it back public information. So this project, you know, some people say, oh, what's the big deal? So it's just a picture of someone walking on the street. It's like this is street photography, right? But some other people say, oh no, that's like too much, you know, like this, like you are a crazy, horrible person. But they forgot that this picture is already public. It's already on internet. It's way more public than when I put it on the street. And this has to do with how we perceive what is public and what's private today. So it's like how is the perception of this kind of material. And here I have to introduce, again, the aesthetics and ethics. That is an issue that many artists faces, especially if you do kind of political work. And so the ethics of representation of this issue, that's huge, and the ethics of intervention, so what is too much, and how do you balance those things, and how do you make that engaging so that people can discuss what's going on. So, and this is a pretty big issue when it's about participation and coercion. So how far you want to have your audience participating and how much you are forcing your audience to participate. And this is pretty clear in this project that's about Facebook. It's called Face to Facebook. It's from 2011, was kind of early on when Facebook was getting big. This project was made with Alessandro Ludovico. There's another Italian media theorist and artist. So in this case, we are looking at the algorithm that I made and I coded. So basically, I was harvesting, collecting hundreds of thousands of public profile on Facebook. So basically, I was looking for a random person on Facebook, taking all the data, and then looking for the friends of that person, and taking all the data and looking for the other friends. And so potentially, I could take all Facebook by just like following friends of friends, right? And so through that, I created a huge database, 1 million people with a profile and picture, name and surname, likes, and so on. And then I utilized this very early facial recognition software with artificial intelligence, actually. So the artificial intelligence started to crop all this picture and find out which expressions they add in the picture. And so I ended up to have a very well organized database that was then published on this dating website that was called lovelyfaces.com, where you could find random people sorted for by their facial expression eventually. Facial expression, or actually the temperament, but the temperament was guessed by artificial intelligence. So you could actually find a smug woman, a sly man, whoever you like. And so in the profile of these people, you can see that, you know, this French sly woman, there is the original picture and the picture that's been cropped, and then there is a list of things that she likes. And nevertheless, on the other side, you can see there is also like a way to do like data mining. So actually you can find other 800 sly French women that like Rage Against the Machine and IKEA. And you can contact this person and you can potentially arrange a date with this person. So this project generated some reaction on the media too. Let's watch this video.
This afternoon, a warning about your Facebook page. Your picture and information may now be part of an unauthorized online dating site. The site's creators say they're trying to make a point. A Cherokee County woman is trying to make some unwanted emails go away. Channel 2's consumer investigator Jim Strickland talked with her today. Jim?
Javita, the creators of lovelyfaces.com say their dating site, seeded with unauthorized Facebook pics, is meant to prove how vulnerable Facebook users leave themselves. Cindy Holtzman of Cherokee County needs no further convincing.
There doesn't seem to be any reason why you'd be getting emails from strange men.
Not 7 of them in a 2-3 day period from all over the world.
But Cindy Holtzman of Woodstock says those emails started coming shortly after last week's launch of a dubious dating site called lovelyfaces.com.
They won't sell my information to a third party, but they'll, in my opinion, steal it from a second party.
2 European artists admit to scraping 250,000 photos from Facebook pages and creating a dating site with them. We found the fancy YouTube video explaining the whole deal. Holtzman says she can't find her picture yet, but she's suddenly getting emails from single men. One charmer writes about how stunning she looks.
I don't want these emails. They're creepy.
Computer security expert Gregory Evans says the Facebook users share some responsibility.
Right, so this was happening pretty much all over the place. So this became very viral. So in one day or a few days, we counted over 1,000 press mention, so including the CNN and pretty much really from all over the world. And some of these reactions became personal, and so people could write, leave messages on the website, and you can see that they were they vary a lot, but a lot of people were very upset, of course. So there is someone that say, please find me a smug woman, and many they say, fuck your site, you sucks, motherfuckers, and so on. But there is also some people say, great social art project, keep going, and so on. So there are very quite a few. And after a while, also the lawyers from Facebook start to write. So this was the first season. This is letter arriving with our home address. We don't know exactly how they found it. So this was a very aggressive letter saying basically that I wasn't allowed to do so. And they mention a few law. There is one that's particularly scary. That's like the California Comprehensive Computer Data Access and Fraud Act. That's pretty heavy. And between the things that they were saying was about giving back the data that was stolen. That was actually very funny because they already have the data and you don't know how to send back the data. And another thing, we were on Facebook, so we did have accounts on Facebook, and they shut down the account and they banned us from Facebook forever. At least that's what they were saying. So we replied to this letter by saying that there was no violation really, that was a huge vulnerability in their system, and they cannot pretend to own this data because actually was owned by the user. And so through other lawyers, especially the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, actually we kept sending letter back and forth till they dropped the case. And now the piece is shown mainly with this installation where there's the documentation of how it was done, the media reaction, the legal reactions, and also these kind of panels where there is a selection of few pictures, 3,000 only, but they are sorted by facial expression. Okay, this was Facebook, but let's go on. So we talk about participation, but what's social bubble? So sometimes you participate in these systems and you are stuck actually in a very small group of people. And this is the case of persecuting.us. So in this case, I was focusing on the US election of 2012 between Mitt Romney and Obama. And I was harvesting, again, everyone that was like tweeting about the US election. But not only people that tweeted about it, also their friends, because eventually you are associated with this person. And then I ran, again, an algorithm that start to score, to sort all these people to see how much they were left-wing or right-wing. And so I ended up with a huge database that eventually had profiles like this, where you have this guy that is 70% left-wing activist, is just because it's like saying their political affiliation. We know exactly where he lives. This picture is pretty old at this point. It's like drunk having a party. But we can tweet to him and say, look, I know where you are, I know what you think, and this could be a threat somehow. And of course, you also have the case of a right wing, same situation. We know where she is and we know what she thinks. So this is kind of like talking about basically information civil war that today is very present. Back then wasn't that present, but if you think today how people react on Twitter, and especially in the political polarization, and eventually how these people are stuck in a social bubble, and eventually when they try to have a conversation, the conversation is this kind of threats, this kind of like violent confrontation where there is not actually dialogue. And this is also because of the platform itself that doesn't allow that, and because of the algorithm behind the platform that keep you in that bubble for a purpose. And the purpose is like to target you and to control what you think. That today became what is in the White House. So in the installation, in this case, is a soundtrack that basically is a robotic voice reading all these tweets, all these statements. And this also pointed the fact, it's like kind of like invoking the idea of wiretapping, right? Or like kind of like the propaganda by media. But the fact is that today we cannot really perceive this kind of like surveillance, this kind of propaganda, because the machines and the amount of data is so huge that there is no way you can listen. This is like, I think it's like 3 months long soundtrack, right? You cannot, there is no human person that you can perceive this huge amount of data and understand it, unless it's a machine. Okay, so we talk about that, and we keep talking about privacy. And so privacy versus transparency. So there is kind of a confusion sometimes, especially when you compare surveillance and transparency. So sometimes people like confuse the two. Oh no, transparency is bad, or surveillance is privacy whatsoever. But I want to discuss this through this project. So in this case, it's about tax haven, offshore finance. So think about Switzerland, or think about the Cayman Islands. So wealthy individuals, banks, multinational, they go to these countries because the privacy law in those countries is so strong, it's so good, that no one can see what these people do there. Because they say, oh yes, this is my thing, you are not allowed to see who I am, what I own, and what I am doing. So in that case, privacy is not that good, right? So this was kind of like very challenging project. I did a lot of research about offshore finance. I interviewed experts, and I kept working till I end up at the Cayman Islands, although there are actually over 40 countries in the world that are offshore centers, are considered offshore centers. But somehow the Cayman Islands is interesting also geopolitically, because it's very close to the US, but it's a British colony. And there's a lot of like Chinese stuff going on in there. And first of all, that data about the Cayman Islands wasn't public yet. And so it ended up in this website. It's a general register, general registry of the Cayman Islands, where it's very cheesy website. You can see where there is even like the registry of who got married and so on. And then there is this button that says search for company information now. So I registered, I made an account, but I couldn't search really. It was just giving me 5 companies if you knew the name of what you were searching for. So I hacked that button, and I managed to get the list of all the companies incorporated in the Cayman Islands that end up to be over 200,000 companies in the Cayman Islands. Quite a bit of data. And I didn't know what to do. It was just like the name of companies, really. So I kept researching, and I found this certificate, this kind of paper certificate. It was a scan, very rare, that somehow, it's kind of an ID of the company, but also has this stamp that say exempted. That means they don't pay taxes. So I just started to forge this certificate for each of the company, and so the name of the company is real. The number here is real. This is kind of the social security. And signed by me with my real signature and my real name. And so then I started to have this concept where I wanted to sell these companies for everyone, just because everyone should be allowed to do what these wealthy individuals. So the idea was to democratize tax evasion for everyone. So by stealing the identity of real Cayman Island companies. So maybe I can show. So on the website Loophole for All, you could search for any name, and then you would find the certificate, and you could buy it for 99 cents, so very cheap. So here the idea is everyone can become one of these companies because these companies are anonymous. So eventually when you file taxes, you bring this certificate and say, look, this is my company, the Cayman Islands, so you won't pay taxes here. The IRS say, oh yeah, really? So we go to the Cayman Islands governments, whatsoever, and we ask if you are the real owner. And the Cayman Islands will say, no, we can tell you. And so you can keep going, basically, as far you there. So, of course, these also generated reactions starting from the Cayman Islands.
Known computer hacker claims to have breached the Cayman Islands Registry of Companies website. Paolo Cirio says he's published details of more than 200,000 companies listed here in Cayman. But government insists there has been no breach and reassures businesses their information is safe. In a statement issued today, they say the hacking claim is fake, and they've received a number of queries to government over the claim. Donnell Dixon, the registry's senior assistant registrar, adds the registry's website features robust security features that avert information theft. The statement says the so-called hacker had simply cut and pasted company names into a template to create bogus certificates. Mr. Cirio has previously hacked popular sites like Facebook and Amazon. A world-renowned...
Okay, so here they're basically trying to minimize what I was doing, and it's true, it was just like doing copy and paste in a template. But somehow this was enough to make these companies worry. And in fact, this is another press coverage from the newspaper of the Bermuda, and they are concerned that I would apply the same system of Bermuda, and so they say this artist is going to be here and attack us in the same way. So that means that potentially they saw this as a risk. And nevertheless, people were start to use this. So these like people that start to buy and write me, and this, for instance, like someone from Spain that has a small business, a fruit store, and they ask me how to use this certificate to avoid taxes in Spain. And actually, I was making money, so I actually start to sell pretty well, and I was actually having already like 6,000 and so in a couple of weeks, and so till PayPal sent me another letter where they said, okay, you're not allowed to do so, so the account was banned and all the money was frozen, and basically because cannot be used for illegal activity. But if you keep scrolling, you see that this letter comes from Luxembourg, and that's where PayPal is based, and they don't pay taxes in Europe for billions. So it really depends where is illegal, when and how. And so this is actually kind of a plan, so it was kind of expected. And these like the diagrams that explain how we start to sell and make this operation happening. And this diagram is actually very similar to the diagrams of a multinational, just in a smaller scale. So basically multinationals, bank and wealth individual, they take advantage of specific jurisdictions from specific state for different reasons, and they leverage that. And that's what I did too. So in this case, I am based in New York. My bank account is in New York, but to sell these material, I have a company in London, the city of London. There's another offshore center, so I don't pay taxes in US for these. And the things were sold via Luxembourg, so the cash was going directly to New York. Nevertheless, the Cayman Islands, if they really want to sue me or doing something against me, they had to go to London, where I had the LTD, a limited liability company. So I could just like get bankrupt as a company, but nevertheless, I am also an Italian citizen, so it would have been very hard for them to catch me there. And the data was stored all in California, where usually servers providers are kind of lax on publishing controversial information. So this was kind of the scheme, and at one point, of course, there were actually also companies owner of the Cayman Islands. They didn't like to be hijacked by a stranger and having their identity stolen. So this is like a small fish that write me very pissed and say, we'll use all force and power to get you off the net. Basically because he has a small company, the Cayman Islands. But after a while, I started to receive also bigger fish. So this is like a hedge fund from China that asked me to remove 4 companies. And if you look at the very bottom, you see that it's pretty big financial firm from Hong Kong and Beijing, and probably there are also like who knows what else behind. I received a bunch of these. I just show you the most interesting. So in this case, it's a huge bank, maybe you heard of, and it's interesting because it comes from Wall Street, One Wall Street, but the letter, as you see, is sent to my company in London. Although in New York, I am in Chinatown, so I am actually a few blocks from them. But they still have to send the letter all over the world. So in some cases, it become also kind of like interesting to negotiate or like to engage these people, kind of a communication. So this is like a huge company in Korea, in South Korea. It's basically the General Motor of Korea writing me and say to remove this list of companies, the 5 down here. And then I replied to them and say, look, there are so many companies that have this name. Are you sure you own all of them? And they reply, I am claiming the ownership of only these 2. That's pretty funny because you can see they have all the same name, right? So in this case, I also kind of like tricked them. These also show you what is actually this about. So these names are very similar names because what they do is they slice as the same company in a million pieces, and each piece is used for basically hiding money, hiding debt, credit, and any kind of financial instruments behind that. So that's a very common case where sometimes there are, 50. They have very, very similar names. It's changed only 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So this is also very interesting letter. These come from a law firm, and these are the guys, these are the accountants that set up these companies. So these people are very interested to protect their business. It's funny, this letter comes from the Isle of Man, the small island between England and Ireland, and is actually an offshore center, of course. But if you look at the bottom, it's actually the address in Gibraltar. That's another offshore center close to Spain, always kind of like a colony of the Brits. So here, it's also very funny because they asked me to remove all the companies that have the name sovereign, sorry, that means a lot in legal term. In this case, I couldn't negotiate because, of course, these are very powerful and very scary people, so I had to remove all the names with sovereign. They were like probably 40 or many. But however, if you go to the second page, you see that it's signed by someone. And so if you look it up, this name, you figure that it's a huge billionaire in UK, and is actually also an art collector, and is also someone that basically give awards in art. So this also like show you, well, first of all, it's nice to be in touch with a collector, not in this term. But it also show you how these 2 words start to overlap very easily. And then there is also some good news. So there is also some other kind of reactions that I receive. And sometimes there are journalists, sometimes there are activists, and they say, oh, this is very useful, actually. I discovered a lot through that. And this email arrived really 1 month, 2 months ago, and it's an investigator, and he said that he's looking for pension money, your pension money, US pension money, and he said there was a fraud. And thanks to your project, I am actually managing to find out way more. And so this is the installation where I basically document pretty much what happened, the diagrams, the certificates that everyone can take for free in the show, and the videos, and the companies, a selection of the company. All right. So we are moving toward economy and moving toward access, and how that produces knowledge or how knowledge become economy, right? So here I present daily paywall that as several shoot together, nevertheless, piracy. So in this case, I focus on these three financial newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, the Financial Times. You probably heard of them. They are the main financial newspaper. So when you want to read the news online, sometimes there are these paywalls where you have to pay to read the articles. And sometimes they get pretty expensive. Like the Financial Times can get over $400 a year as just to read maybe one news, because maybe you're interested in only one, but you have to pay the membership. So what I did pay them, and they make an account. So these are the login page with my password, my account, and then I made a script that basically was constantly logging in and taking all the content they were published every single day, and everything was published for free on the website Daily Paywall. But that wasn't enough. I mean, giving this kind of information for free is already interesting. And so I printed it. I also had a printed copy that was distributed in New York. But the real concept was this, where I was promoting the idea of paying people $1 if they were reading one article and answering correctly to an answer. But eventually, also journalists could earn money if they were writing good articles. This through a crowdfunding system. So basically, people that can afford can donate money, and that money can go to the readers or can go to the author of this article. So instead of like having people to pay to read and access information, eventually people get paid to do so. I guess you wish could be like that in the university, where you get paid to study. So I focused on 8 or a few other articles that were kind of like crucial. So one about climate change, one about financial crime and corruption and so on. And then the thing was just out there. So the media started to write about it. So it became again viral, many kind of articles all over the world. Also because $1 can be quite a bit for an Indian person, for instance. And then I started to receive, again, personal reactions. And these were kind of interesting reactions. And I guess it's because people have like mixed feeling about piracy, and especially about the publishing industry. So there is someone at the very top that say, well, usually I like your work, but this case, I don't know if I like it. And it was a journalist that lost the job because of the crisis in the publishing industry. Someone else tweet say, found the artist, fuck you. I don't know why it's so bad to give a donation to the artist in this case, but they say that piracy would help someone. And there is also someone saying, is this legal? Can I actually read these? Even just reading, is this legal? Anyhow, these are kind of mixed reaction, but it's also true that there is quite a bit of concern, especially if you are like a media creator or like you write. So actually, you want to get paid for your effort. Although in this case, I was promoting the fact that I was going to pay also journalists. So anyhow, the model was working now. So there were people paying, donating, and there were people answering to the questions, and pretty much it's even. I was going to pay 500, and I was earning 400, and the news were a lot, by the way. So everything was going well till I received another letter, very interesting letter, where they mentioned quite a few copyright law, international now. And the interesting thing is that it's signed by this company, this Person. So Person PLC is actually a huge multinational, a British multinational that was owning both the Financial Times and The Economist. They are actually also the main publisher of business books. I guess you guys probably also study on books by person. So it's interesting as one company, a publisher company, could basically monopolize all the literacy about business and finance. And so this is also something that I was addressing with the project. So the language that this magazine, newspaper use is also very particular. So accessing this information is kind of like a language issue sometimes. And nevertheless, also talking about how information is also driving these financial products. Sometimes access to privileged information is very key in the financial world. So in the installation, there is again a documentation of everything. So I want to keep talking very quickly about this idea of information as economy, and especially information as money. Especially today that we start to see cryptocurrency or digital money going around. So how we perceive that as money and also as ownership. So I will present this very quickly, these other projects that are actually about ownership of shares, ownership of informational system. So in this case, the old project is called Google Will It Itself. It's actually part of this trilogy called Hacking Monopolism Trilogy, and here is talk about monopolies and especially how these companies become monopolies. So in this case, I was targeting Google. So I created these networks of fake websites where they were like banners by Google. So basically, you can place, you can host a banner of Google, and Google will pay you based on the amount of clicks there will be on that banner. So in that case, I made all this script pretty sophisticated. It was like making automatic clicks, and these clicks were generating money, basically. Google was supposed to send checks. And so the conceptual idea was to utilize that money to buy share of Google and eventually make Google a public company, so reversing the model. So this is another project of the trilogy. In this case was again about piracy, but in this case actually about how Amazon became such a powerful company too. So back then, this was 2006, Amazon was trying to have a deal with publishers. Now it's very normal to see books online, but back then publishers didn't want to share their books at all. So Amazon managed to get that deal first, and that was a big thing. And so in this case, they had a vulnerability. So you could search inside the book any word, anything, but when the result of the search was giving you basically the next phrase of the word you were looking at. So basically, this script was continuously asking for the next phrase, and phrase by phrase, it was composing the entire book. And the book was then made in a PDF and basically shared on the peer-to-peer network for free for everyone. And then the third project is Face-to-Facebook that we already discussed. Talking about money really and information, I want to present this one that's like peer-to-peer gift credit card. In this case, I was issuing counterfeited credit cards by Visa. So on this website that's still online, and a lot of people applied to that, you can get a unique credit card number. So the number is made by the same algorithm that actually Visa utilized. So it's kind of like a proper credit card. And you get also like some money, virtual money, of course, through this monetary policy that I created. So here the idea is that usually banks are actually creating money out of nothing, or at least just by adding numbers in the book. These are specific laws. It's not a conspiracy. It's just that banks do that to boost the economy. The point, though, that they have all that power, we don't we cannot make our own money. So in this case, I am proposing, okay, the banks are still there, the credit cards are still there, but actually it's people that create credit, interest-free credit for each other, and eventually that would also boost the economy, but it would be more a democratic system. So in this project, I managed to print actually thousands of these Visa credit cards that were, with all different numbers, they were also distributed person to person, and people start to use them, sometimes also like as proof of credit. So also in this case, I don't want to know what they did with this. And this is the installation as everything in display. So let's go back on the issue of privacy. Well, privacy and accountability. So now we are looking at selfie that was published on Twitter, and this selfie is with Michael Rogers, that is the present director of the NSA. Trump didn't change the director of NSA, scary enough. So in this case, this guy met Michael Rogers, and with the phone, you can see, took a picture together and posted on Twitter, and eventually it was monitoring Twitter and the social media for any picture of the official of the NSA, FBI, and CIA. And this picture became a poster on the street in London, New York, and Berlin, and so on. So the selfie became exposed, overexposed right away. This also in this picture, we are looking at a post on Facebook. In this case, also a very popular guy from the NSA, Kit Alexander. So this lady met Kit Alexander somehow, somewhere, maybe they were in a date, and also in this case, they took a picture together. This is her Facebook account, and they found this picture, and it became a street art poster with this face pasted on the wall. There are a few of these. There are 9 of this person, and eventually also made some painting. It's like pop art painting. And they were also sold in the art fairs, of course, without the authorization of these people. We are looking now at a very popular figure, James Comey. So this is also very funny. So in this case, there is a sheriff in the backstage of a conference where James Comey was going to speak, and the sheriff literally steal a picture of James Comey while he's like distracted. But eventually find this picture, and he become also like a poster and a painting shown in several museums. And in this case, it's interesting because it's the same people that want to control these systems are actually also they are not controlling. They lost control. In any case, a person, an individual like me, has such a same kind of power to some degree that those that they think they can control these systems. Okay, finally, I'm going to present the last project. I think I've been good with timing, so I can spend a little bit more about this. So here, everything kind of like comes together in a way. So we are talking about access but versus privacy, and also free speech versus transparency. That is also a very confusing line that people still have to figure out. And so this happened with the project Obscurity. So in this case, I am working on the mugshots and criminal records in the US that eventually become public and available on the internet, and eventually they are searchable on Google. And I should show you a video that explains everything.
Obscurity is a project about the publication of mugshots over the internet. It obfuscates tens of millions of criminal records on search engines. It makes it harder to find mugshots and information about those who have been arrested in the United States for the last 20 years. In the States, millions of people are often jailed for minor offenses or due to racial discrimination and the lack of facilities for mental illness, homelessness, and the undocumented. The information about these arrests is made public by law enforcement officers, regardless of the time spent in jail, the charges, or the court's verdict. Mugshot websites republish this information and expose these photos to embarrass and shame people. Their reputation is affected by social stigmas within their community, family, and workplaces, thus affecting their future opportunities. The mugshot websites make their money by charging people a picture removal fee of hundreds of dollars, or by placing advertising alongside listed booking data. Search engines don't care because they profit from collecting everything about everyone. The Obscurity Project promotes the removal of all mugshots from the internet for the right to remove all sensitive information from search engines, which should become a nationwide law. Wait a second. What if a bad doctor or corrupted politician wants to remove information about their past crimes?
And then we are going to talk about that. So in this case, I did the same that those mugshots do. Basically, they go to the website of the jail, the county jail, or the sheriff, and they take all the data that's public data, it's governmental data, right? And they republish it on their own website, like mugshots.com, and they expose this data, and they want to have it very like at the top of the search results when these poor people type their names, and eventually they are looking for a job and they cannot find a job anymore because the employer find out that they were in jail and they don't trust them, right? That's very common, unfortunately. So I did pretty much the same. In that case, I took the data from them, and then I cloned their websites and I obfuscate their data. So we are talking about 10 millions of records, actually to be more than I collected, and then I republished, but obfuscated. So obfuscation means basically creating noise, creating confusion. So also in the pictures are blurred out, so you cannot really recognize people, and the names are all shuffled. So when you look at this picture and this name, they don't really, are not really actually the real person. And so I did this on 6 websites, the major mugshot websites. So we are talking about a lot of data and a lot of people. And when you look at the profile, so you are looking actually at someone that is not called Lori Graham, but it is a female and it's white, and the other data is all accurate, also the state and the county. Because eventually you want to know how many people have been arrested in a specific county of a specific gender and especially a specific race, because that is, would make the police accountable. Nevertheless, though, I wanted to have also this participatory element where you can decide, anyone can decide to remove or keep these data, because eventually this is a dangerous person, or is a politician, or is someone that need to be exposed. So I did this. There are in any case in several states and several counties, and sometimes there are also the booking charges, and you see sometimes like you don't really know what exactly. Sometimes, this is pretty clear why this person was arrested, but sometimes this data is not really entered correctly, and that's something that should be addressed too. So we have someone else from Alabama. Some states have a lot of this. And so, of course, these start to generate some reactions from people that some of them understood what I was trying to do, and some of them wrote me directly and told me their story. So in this case, for instance, there are people saying how much they had to pay to remove this picture, and the first one said that the bill reached $3,000, because there is all this business behind about reputation management, where you would pay a company to clean your reputation online. This has been the saddest project ever, because of course there are like a very terrible story out there. Nevertheless, there is also like people that say, well, I want to buy all this data from you and do who knows what they want to do with that. There have been also a lot of people writing and saying, oh, there is someone missing that I know, can you find this person? Or nevertheless, people asking to submit other mugshots. And some other, they just say, oh, why now they're all blurred out? You were like such of a good website. So it's also like people that actually like these websites and they're confused. They think that these are the actual websites. So it's like kind of like taking that traffic away. So there are quite a few. These because the search engines are indexing all these websites. And it's pretty bad because there is no one legislation that would help you. And eventually, if you pay, they will publish that picture, that information on other websites. So because they know that you're willing to pay. So it's very kind of like tricky situation for these people. Eventually, these also generated like very aesthetic pictures, very kind of interesting visual pictures like these. But somehow these pictures also tell you how hard it is to judge someone online, and not only online, because you cannot really say if this was a nice guy or a bad guy somehow. So this also has to do with the fact, the impossibility to judge and saying, like shaming people like this. So also in this case, I received a cease and desist letter. This was a small cease and desist letter from Just Copyright. And then another one that was more interesting is this one that is accusing me of false advertising and again intellectual property. In this case, they really understood the project. It's a pretty big law firms from several states, and this also shut down one of the website. If you look close to this company, this is like based in the Caribbean as well, because they are hiding. So the owner is anonymous of this website, of course, because they are worried to be sued and they don't want to be public. They are trying to say that they are willing to sue me in both UK and US, fun enough. But really what I am trying to do with this project is promoting this privacy policy law. So in this case, the art project became kind of like a proposal for a new law that is the application of the right to be forgotten that we have in Europe. And here is hard to have it, mainly because the search engines, but also the free speech organizations, they would say, no, this could cause censorship over the internet, because everyone could say, oh, I don't like this picture, I want to remove it from the internet. However, there is a pretty big difference between censorship and having the right to remove such humiliation picture and information. And so, in fact, I do think that this campaign is actually providing free speech for the vulnerable that don't actually have that voice heard. So it's actually the opposite, like actually giving free speech to these people. But again, this law is not happening, and these people are keeping having this data exposed and having their life ruined because there is this misunderstanding between free speech, censorship, and being anonymous, accountable, and so on. So there are quite a bit of this misconception in our information society today. So here I made a little list. I don't talk about all of them, but these are all like things that are getting very blurred, but are kind of complex, but they're very also simple if you think about it. And so what I am just saying that we shouldn't oversimplify polarizing social complexity, and we should also understand the context, first of all, and that's a very basic rule of information. So the context makes the meaning of information. So where is located, distributed, accessed, rated, and used? And so by questioning, measuring, discussing information ethics, they evolve and develop as human rights. And this is the end. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's very stressful and scary, but I guess I got used, but you never know. So just 2 days ago, I republished this mugshot website, although they sent me this cease and desist letter, so in this case I didn't want to accept, so there is a chance that they really want to sue me, for instance, but I am trying to challenge them more. I think it's worth it.
I have another question about that, which is when you move the websites off of the web and just into installations in art spaces, you don't get cease and desist websites anymore, right?
No, yes. Well, it depends. Depends who see that. It's very random, you know, like you don't ever know how people would react. Eventually, could happen. Could happen.
But
Could
hasn't
happen.
happened.
No, it didn't
I
happen.
mean, maybe the gallery is the haven.
Yes, definitely making it art is like helps because you can always play the free speech card in a way. But you know, some people have not been lucky as me, so some people have been sued, and it was a disaster.
I was wondering, in reference to the Lovely Faces project, if you could elaborate on why you decided to put the information into a dating site specifically.
Well, to make it sexy, I would say. Well, yes, I think that probably was a long thinking about how to get more publicity about the project, and nevertheless also talk what is really about Facebook somehow. You know, it's like people are constantly looking for relationships, social relationships. That was also a very difficult thing, of course. I wouldn't do the same today. But back then, you know, Facebook was a new thing. People were like still exciting. It was still kind of like, you know, a weird thing happening. So that's why I did so. And nevertheless, the dating website wasn't on search engines already. So somehow people were kind of aware that the context was an art project. So they were exposed, not all of them, of course, but still there were like some boundaries within. And yes, I think that was mainly to make it funny too, in a way.
There's another question in the same room. Yeah.
Yes.
So I first just want to say thank you for the work you're doing. I think it's very powerful and important. But the thing I have a question about is, at what point do you consider it over, and what point do you consider your job done in ushering this social change?
Well, that's a very difficult decision because I am an artist mainly. So once I made my conceptual point, I am kind of fine. That's why when I received this letter, I kind of like consider the project done because, you know, it like basically confirms. And also sometimes I just expect them, so it's like finishing up the project. But for instance, in this last project of the mugshots, because of these people writing me and asking me for help, I didn't want to finish like that. So that's why I'm pushing the campaign, although that's not really art in the classical term. It's actually being more an activist, or like being more like, you know, promoting these kind of rights. And so in that case, you know, I said, okay, this project is not done, although it's like a lot of work, you know, trying to push a campaign like that. But in that case, you know, I decided to keep it. It really depends by the project. And sometimes they're like very long, sometimes they're very short. It also depends by the amount of reactions and the kind of reactions I receive.
Yeah, thanks. My question is about citizenship. Citizenship depends on responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I can see how you try to expose that the world is corrupt, but sometimes I feel like I already know that, and the next step is to figure out what to do about it. And so there's a lot of work in advancing responsibility and citizenship online that needs to be done. Right. Where do you see your work doing that or leading to that? And
What are next steps to increase responsibility? Because like street ghosts, for example, sure, people are upset that their pictures are there, but most of the time people use it to figure out where to go. So there's a huge convenience benefit, and so how can we make that participation that happens through convenience into something more responsible?
Yes, well, that's something that everyone is trying to figure out. This kind of environment we live in is very new and is growing very fast. And so I, as everyone else, are trying to discover. That's what my art does somehow. You know, like sometimes try to push beyond what is already there, or like try to make questions. I also have some projects that trying to visualize or like think about you know, governance and the use of citizenship or like modes of citizenship in this context. You should look at one particular project called Global Direct. In that case, I really look at how citizenship should be organized, accountability should be organized, and I think every system, Google Street View as well, if you look close to it, it has been far west so far. You know, they just went there on the street, they didn't ask permission, they just took whatever they wanted. At the beginning, they didn't even blur the pictures. And then slowly the legislator tried to like have a law, and eventually they got banned, and eventually they go early in the morning when there is no people, or like they improve the algorithms, you know, or eventually they get taxed by the city, and so from that money they make something else. You know, there are several things you can do. For sure, not oversimplify things. So there are complex systems, but there are also like counteraction that you can apply to that system.
So I was interested in there was an arc, just to follow up on Greg's point, because I think it's a really good one. There was an arc in the way in which you presented the work narratively, where you went from this strange intersection of real public space and the space of negotiation of privacy and publicity online, and then you went increasingly into the sort of heart of darkness of the internet, and the projects became much less tangible and were made tangible only through illustrations and through gallery installations. But there's a way in which one might argue, like with the latest news this week, that Google is reimagining whole neighborhoods in cities like Toronto and things like that, and very active in this notion of changing and altering physical space, that we are facing a larger arc where, having given up rights in the context of virtual space because of its supposed separation from real space, that these companies and frameworks are coming back into public space, but with the conceptions of publicity and privacy that have been developed outside of it. And so I would be interested to hear you, whether you've thought about this kind of increasing recollision of the real and the virtual, and how practices like yours can both help shape and comment and manage that interaction.
Well, yes, I don't think, you know, I think we used to distinguish between the virtual, the digital, and the physical space. But I think today it's like they're influencing each other. So I actually don't make that distinction anymore. And, you know, so like in the environment we see today, you know, it's like between what you see on the phone and where you walk. And that's just going to be increasingly like that. And that affect then the other social systems and the law, and eventually how big companies redevelop the physical space. That for sure is going to happen. Yes, I don't know if this answers your question.
Hey, I loved all this work. I really loved the tax havens project. I was interested, you know, to see all of these people who had these anonymous corporations set up and say, hey, that's my corporation, please take that down, effectively de-anonymizing themselves. And I wonder if you've thought about using that de-anonymization to kind of reject their right to privacy, if you've left them alone, even when you knew their identities and what they owned.
Well, first of all, if I had more information about them, I wouldn't be alive, simply, just because, thanks God, I have only the names in a way, you know, because there are also like a lot of criminals out there, like just a week ago, actually, a few days ago, someone was assassinated in Malta because of that. I don't know if you heard about that. Yes, they become more public, but at the same time, there is still a degree of secrecy that is still there, and there is, so far as not be challenged. Even the Panama paper didn't include the Cayman Islands, so we don't still know what's going on there. This just gives you a glimpse, you know, just a glimpse of the amount of companies and kind of their nature, really, and how they work, but it doesn't give you, you know, a clear picture of that. That would like change a lot of things, as Panama paper did.
Were there any other countries that weren't in the Panama Papers besides Cayman?
Oh yeah, there were a lot. Yeah, Panama paper I think includes Panama paper includes Panama, of course, and the British Virgin Islands. And maybe there is another one, but not so many. But it was from one specific law firm. That's why, because the Cayman Islands, there are also other 2 law firms that have not been really like challenged in that way yet.
That was a great talk, thanks. I'm curious about these art projects that use data as a precursor material for your art project and that involve scraping or acquiring data. What do you use in your art practice to kind of anonymize the data or do best practices on making sure that that data that you have, if it is ever subpoenaed or gets out, isn't going to do harm on people?
Yeah, well, there are a few strategies that I think about it. So, for instance, not having them indexed on the search engines is already big, because you need to know the website, you need to know the project was about, you know, just the context. That's why I was talking about context. It's very important also in judging what I do. But in some cases, you want that accurate. So, in fact, in the Mugshot website, as I was explaining, some data is actually very accurate because still helpful, but you want to anonymize other kind of data. And that's like goes back to the idea of, you know, like, okay, be very, like, complexity can be simplified because we do have the instrument to control that complexity. So it's not out of control. In that case, for instance, we can still have these, you know, criminal records out there, but in different form, in different context. That's what I am trying to say.
Hi. I had a question about the media. It seems as though you document it in the final pictures in the art gallery. Some of the clips had definitely the reporter had contacted you, or you were involved in it. So what role does the media have in sort of your creative process and in also either sparking public dialogue or amplifying the work that you're doing? What's the relationship there? Can you speak to that?
Well, the relationship is, as you said, like trying to make it more public. So the reason why I do internet art and street art is because I want a wider public. And the media is kind of like, you know, another kind of wall, public space in a way. So if you manage to get a news on CNN, it's like, you know, having billboards over a very trafficked street in a way. There are also some, you know, issues about the media, how language of the media. So, for instance, the fact that was a dating website was made for, you know, having like the media talking about it, or like saying that I stole information, like, you know, make it a more interesting headline for the media, like using the word piracy, for instance, make it more appealing for the media. So that's why I do it. It doesn't really always work. Sometimes I don't need it. Sometimes else I need it. And you never know if it works. Like, for instance, the project about the elections, the tweets never got really mentioned in the press. Don't know why. Probably back then it wasn't a big deal, or people didn't really react. I don't know. It's also hard to say, you know. But yeah, I try to involve, having the media involved.
Hi, I really share your concern with many of these issues, especially surveillance and privacy. And one of my concerns with that issue is the aggregation of metadata and how computer scientists have shown the tremendous likelihood of false positives. So I'm curious how you, as an artist, might address that issue of the aggregation of metadata through massive surveillance and storage of that data. Is there a way that artists can respond to that specifically that comes to mind? Is that something you'd be interested in pursuing?
I did a project that was about metadata about your browser, and how even if you use Tor, even if you use the private mode on your browser, or even if you use a VPN, your browser is still tractable because of the metadata hidden behind. That's a very technical issue. Yes, it's a concern. How do you do that? Again, the legal field should catch up, should be way faster, should be way more aggressive against these companies. In California, I think it's pretty okay. I think they did address, for instance, the metadata in the way they are used to track your browser, because that is used by advertising companies to know, you know, when when you use your phone, your computer, your tablet. And I think in California they did have a law about that, or at least was discussed. So there is really nothing to do. I mean, yes, with the technology you can provide new tools. With artists you can, like, you know, expose these issues. But at the end of the day, you also need like some legislation or like actual policy that would, you know, force these companies to not do whatever they want.
Okay, great. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.